Alright, hello. My topic today is about propaganda, or more specifically, how the US military and government use propaganda to recruit soldiers into the army, and how these methods changed over time. I will organize the facts and information based on times of conflict in the US history, as although recruiting soldiers during peacetime is important, it isn't as important or as prominent during times of war. Time periods I listed include Revolutionary War, World War I, World War II, and modern day. I will also have uh, short mentions of other conflicts, such as the Spanish American War, but these times aren't as important and will only be briefly mentioned. First, what is propaganda, and what other methods of recruitment did the US government use to get more soldiers? Well, propaganda is information spread so as to convince people of one side of an argument. Generally, this information tries to evoke an emotional response to what is stated, and is generally twisted or misleading so you're more agreeable to whatever political view is being put on you. The other method is something I'll call direct recruitment. This may already be a term, but this is what I will call the ways the government or the US Army uses to just outright ask you to be a soldier or other similar things. It is direct recruitment, it is not a roundabout such as propaganda. Direct recruitment could be examples such as a poster saying, I quote, "Need more soldiers for the war, pay is X money a month." That would be direct recruitment. You need soldiers, and there's your pay. Now onto the information. The Revolutionary War is, well, a long time ago, yet the methods are so similar to years following. When asked what was one of the older ways of spreading information, people may think of newspapers, but actually, back in the 1700s, a method known as broadsheets was used. They're also known as broadsides as well. They'll be stapled onto bulletins or walls in public spaces. Broadsheets were much alike to the newspapers of today, but just as the name says, just one large broadsheet of paper with several columns on it full of information. Here, both propaganda and direct recruitment could be written so as to convince readers to join up with the Continental Army. Another thing similar to the previous method was public assemblies. I think we all know what an assembly is, and much like broadsheets, both propaganda and direct recruitment can be used here. Next is a very famous image in American history, the join or die image that was spread around in America, showing what would happen if people, or rather the states, did not reunite together. This was the first ever political cartoons in America specifically, and one of the earliest uses of propaganda in America. So the first cartoon and the first use of propaganda. As back then, ways of spreading information was difficult, the country wasn't fully put together, and was simply not something that was done in that time period. Fun fact, this image was created during the French and Indian Wars, not during the Revolution, but this image gained widespread use leading up to the Revolution. Now onto direct recruitment, and away from propaganda. I mentioned earlier about that thing about pay. This isn't 100% accurate, or at least not for this time period. Soldiers weren't advertised a salary, but instead a one time large pay. Connected to this pay was a contract stating a time period that the soldiers had to stay in the army. After that, they could leave or accept another contract for more money and spend time in the military. Remember, we saw this a while ago in one of the videos earlier this year, when Knox was concerned about how the war would continue, as the soldiers were all miserable and their contracts are going to end soon. Finally, we're on to drafts. Another thing we should all be familiar with, drafts, back then in the 1700s,
Whitman?
were much less
So now I'm
effective
traveling
and
backward in
more
time.
Protect the
unorganized.
people at a minute's
Drafts
notice.
couldn't
That
pull
was the
random
idea.
able bodied men into
So I
service
joined
like in
up,
the
wanted to
future.
make a
Instead,
difference.
drafts
And
would
I
take
did, but
people from local
things fell
militias and
apart.
towns. The US is
So
not
it looks like
developed
I'm the
enough
last
that it
minute
could
man left
properly
standing.
send letters and orders to people's homes. The carrier system simply wasn't good enough. Also, the US wasn't fully cemented yet, and its governmental power over the people was weak and could be, for some extent, be ignored. World War I, the Great War, the war to end all wars, and other names. Skipping past other conflicts such as the 1812 Civil War and several others, we arrive 139 years since the start of the American Revolution. Many things have changed over this period of time. The country spans coast to coast, new technologies, a more powerful government, and time period after the Spanish American War. This war, Spanish American War, wasn't skipped past directly as much as the others, as it introduces a new form of propaganda, yellow journalism. Information that isn't really information due to exaggeration, sensational, sensationalism, and its ability to prey on emotions. When we think of propaganda, we think of it as something negative, something that doesn't try to tell us the truth. We get that image thanks to yellow journalism. The saying goes, evil people spread propaganda while we read the news. Is that quote or something similar? I can't fully remember. Anyways, back onto the World War One. You now have much more to work with and new ways to spread it. With large factories and better printing presses, World War One is much different from the past. As although back in the previous wars the government was trying to get more soldiers, it was nothing compared to this war. World War One marks the first widespread effort to paint the enemy as evil, as the enemy. This is called dehumanization, often used in forms of media to picture the enemy as brutes and monsters. The most notable example of this is the rape of Belgium. Side note here, it, I now the rape of Belgium. I tried to look it up on the school Chromebooks to pull this information. I couldn't look it up because securely blocked the word rape. Just a little fun fact. All right, along along with this is this elopement poster. I'll put it up on the screen. This enlistment poster. Onto the topic of posters, some of you may be thinking, why didn't they just use the same posters or the same type of posters? There is a reason why there's a mix of posters. The mix is meant for different situations: pay, patriotism, and drafts. These are the three methods used when they were forcing people to join, giving them an incentive in pay, or making people of their own volition to join by patriotism. Do you have enough soldiers? Well, then there's no need for a draft. So up the production of propaganda that would pull on citizens' sense of pride and nationalism. And then more situations like this. Posters such as the "I wish I were a man, I would join the Navy" is a mix of both propaganda and direct recruitment. It's Navy recruitment, but also sexist underlying propaganda, as men seeing this who wouldn't join would be viewed as less than a woman to others, pulling people in with their sense of pride or fear of being left out and humiliated. The mindset of people and the culture of the time was very much different from today. People viewed this as something that they must get involved in, or they thought it was the right thing to do. Look back to the propaganda and yellow journalism stuff. That feeling of it being the right thing to do was exemplified by efforts like this. This also relates to war being romanticized by the public at the start of the conflict. It wasn't until after the war or when people set off for it that second thoughts about the romantic parts of it started to set in. I don't want to get into how romanticism came to be and how it played out, as it's not really related to my topic. A final note of World War One is parades. Again, another thing that we all know. But time to get into the info. Grand parades are generally held before or after a war as a way to get everybody feeling good and inspired. Another thing that fits in the emotional side of wars and recruitment. World War Two. I can't really go on like the last time listing out the different names for a grand effect because the other names suck and no one really heard of them before. Back on topic. World War Two has the exact same stuff as the last World War, but this time there's radio and movies, two new technologies for this time, and two new ways to get people to join the military. Now, what can this do for you? Not much, really. So, yes, TV and radio are pretty big things in the viewpoint and how it affects recruitment efforts by the US. Not much has changed, though, outside of this. It's just now more organized than the last World War, which is already more organized than other wars, and is now more sophisticated. The word to call these new forms, though, is invasive. Invasive, invasive, invasive. The government is putting propaganda literally everywhere in World War II. Do you want to relax and listen to the radio? Propaganda. Want to go on a nice night and see a movie? Well, it's romanticized and shows how epic the US military is. Do you want to read something? Maybe a newspaper or a comic? Well, too bad. It's also propaganda. Everything's propaganda. It's all full of ads asking you to support the war. What I haven't mentioned earlier in my time periods listed is not all propaganda and recruitment efforts were 100% directed to getting people on the front lines. They also wanted people to not have views against the military and to give the government stuff or to help in non combative wars. Comics were used to inspire the people, help identify the enemy, simply so people can direct their anger, dehumanization, and as a way of involving multiple generations with propaganda. I won't talk about drafts here, as it's the same as the last war, just now drafting is occurring at the start of the war and not. at the start of the war and not partway through. Fun fact: did you know World War II was not the first time that propaganda depicted Asians as having yellow skin, but in fact it's been going on for at least 100 years. Alright, backtracking to how invasive propaganda has become, many famous actors and celebrities of that time participated in pro US movies, such as the actor Bogart, starring in movies such as Sahara, Action in the North Atlantic, and Across the Pacific. These movies were made to romanticize the war and show how cool the army is. To finish off World War II, let's mention enemy propaganda. So yes, my topic is about US history and such. It's important to mention radios though, as radios are one of the most first common things to easily transmit messages across the world. Other countries, of course, made use of this. Germany, for example, would broadcast messages all the way to America from Europe, so as to hopefully demoralize the people and possibly to get them riled up and pro Germany. For instance, back in World War One, when many ethnic Germans supported Germany, this lasted until Germany started committing atrocities. Radio show hosts of this time, such as Axis Sally, Mildred Gillers, Fred Kaltenbach, and many more. Apologies for butchering any of those names. Continuing. Like my statement, enemies would give propaganda, good people, your side, or your faction would give the news. Onto modern day, or at least around this time. After World War II, the US has entered many conflicts, but none of these campaigns have been true war. Most have been proxy wars with Russia and China, so nothing in depth about these conflicts will be discussed for now. Going for a focus on the volunteer army part of recruitment. During the 80s, to present day, the recruitment methods for the US Army has followed a rule of cool type motto, with TV ads portraying tanks and soldiers, with sayings mentioning things like steel and iron, or strength through discipline, strength through community, strength through action, and strength through pride. For anyone that gets that reference, good job. The strength through discipline stuff, good job. All right, remember these TV ads from the beginning of the year and that slideshow in the first couple of days in class? Along with TV ads, Army recruiters would go to schools and malls, standing in their Class A uniform.
Idle teens at 1 o'clock.
Intercepting in three, two. Because of exciting current events, the Army needs new members.
New members who want to earn money for college and see a part of the world that tourists never go to.
Doesn't the Army have to fight in wars?
Damn it! Even the dumbest teenagers in the dumbest town in the dumbest state know better than to join the Army.
This method, though, in recent years has lost effectiveness as people today go outside less. Malls have fallen with the rise of Amazon and online shopping. An all time low in the trust of the US Army and our government, and the Army can't keep up anymore, simply put, with modern day methods of communication. Army recruiters at first tried to use TikTok for recruitment methods, but were soon banned from the platform by their superior officers and the US government. So today, the US primarily uses school programs like or, Junior ROTC and ROTC for in person recruitment. The Army also tries to use benefits to get people to join, such as, in some places, a 50K monetary incentive for enlisting within 30 days. For non in person recruitment, the Army uses TV ads, or more specifically, YouTube and Twitch. For these media channels, the ads follow two formats, or a third format, which is a mix between the two. The fourth format being that rule of cool thing from earlier, but a shift has taken place in the last 5 years or so, with the Army putting emphasis on being woke and aware of prejudice in the military. But this this shift has flopped somewhat, I guess you could say. Promoting individuality and how everyone is special and important is good. This great, it protects our rights. We need that in our country. But this image of individuality clashes greatly with our image of the US Army. With all that strength through discipline, the Army is a group of exact same individuals, highly skilled operatives. The Army is not a collection of individuals. This view has decreased the number of reenlistment numbers in the US, actually. All this woke stuff. This view has also caused problems as it does not face any problems in the first place. It doesn't underline the struggle that people face, or does it try to fix it? There are also many more struggles in the military than just inclusion. But I do think that a mix between the two, this is the third option, is good, is a good method. Usually showing a woman or an ethnic minority soldier while also showing images of a giant aircraft carrier or tanks in the Middle East. So this shows how the army is a safe place for everyone, well, as safe as being a soldier can be, while also showing the might of the US Army with a show of force.
And track storms.
Fitting in with the Technology Center in 2002, the US Army made an unprecedented move to publish a video game as a way to show what the Army is all about. As a competitive, first-person shooter using more realistic injuries and set combat roles to show how, in a safe fashion, some of the realism of combat. America's Army, that's the name of the game, went on to be well received by critics, but flew under the radar of many, as I suspect many of you haven't heard of this game before. Even though it flew under the radar, the game received enough success to receive further games under the same title, such as America's Army 2, 3, Proving Grounds 5, and more. Sadly, this game is unable to be played anymore as it stopped receiving updates and support as of May of last year, 2002. Not 2002, 2022. To finish off, here's a little fun fact. While I was researching about movies and the impact of them, I found this interesting tidbit. Can you guess what this number is? I'll give you a moment. This number is related to the movie Top Gun. After Top Gun came out in 1986, the Army, or more specifically the Navy, supposedly saw an increase of 500% in enlistment numbers. That's crazy, I think. That's it for the major timeline I listed at the beginning. Now, what has changed and what has stayed the same over time? In short, every method has stayed the same or similar. Every method has persisted. But past methods have been pushed aside for newer and better options, receiving less importance and funding by the US government. But at the end of the day, propaganda is still propaganda. It's just how it's presented to you that's different. A move from in-person and written techniques to the utilization of modern technology, from straight facts to weaponized imagery to impressive sights and inclusion. Alright, I'll see you guys later. Make sure you learn something today and have a better day than me.